Welcome to the Now What podcast, a podcast focused on young adults, epilepsy, and the problems they face. I'm Karan.
And I'm Sophie, and we are advisors to the Cameron Voice Foundation. TCBF honors the legacy of our best friend, Cameron, by aiming to cure epilepsy through funding research, education, and awareness campaigns while still supporting causes that Cameron cared about.
As always, we're incredibly excited about the conversations we're having here each week, and it wouldn't be possible without our phenomenal sponsor, UCB. Each week, we're going to discuss an important topic related to epilepsy in young adults. And this week, we're covering increasing representation to end stigma associated with epilepsy.
So with that being said, let's welcome our guests for the week. First, we have Miles Levine, who is on our board and is an award-winning writer, director, and disability advocate. After a lifetime of living with epilepsy, he's very proud to have turned it into something socially beneficial and encourages storytelling as a means of breaking stigmas and improving quality of life. His short and now full-length movie, Under the Lights, has sparked a worldwide movement surrounding epilepsy portrayals on screen. You've probably heard us talk about him and his work at the foundation, but you can find more details on the movie at underthelightsfilm.com.
And we also have Skylar Economy, an NYC-based Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker whose work amplifies often unheard voices. She directs and produces for Architectural Digest, Vogue, BBC, Vice, CNN, NFL, Netflix, and so many others. She's currently directing a criminal justice documentary feature film and a personal hybrid documentary about her experiences with epilepsy. You can check out all her work on skylareconomy.com. As always, thanks so much for joining us, and let's just get right into it.
My very starter question is, do you think there is a stigma associated with having epilepsy, and what does that look like to you guys?
Definitely. I mean, that's the reason I was closeted about my epilepsy for the majority of my life. I personally grew up with a brother who had epilepsy his entire life, an older brother. So I've experienced epilepsy since birth. And then I was diagnosed when I was 15. So growing up and seeing how epilepsy impacted him on so many levels, whether that was employment, being kicked out of schools, like elementary schools, different, things like that, like big life things, seeing that at such a young age and then having that personally impact me at the age of 15, that alone just, I don't know, you just experience that and it really hits deep on so many personal levels. So yes, with that said, there's so much stigma and it's still such a huge issue.
A great way to answer it. We got a little bit of your backstory too, so thank you. Miles, do you have anything to add? I mean, I know your answer is also yes.
Yeah. No, I think everything's fine. I wouldn't change a thing. I say a lot that I think that we talk a lot about cures, and it's not misguided, but it's almost a little unfortunate that we expect the medical equation to be the answer for all of our troubles as a community, when the truth is that as someone who has epilepsy, and from sitting on the sidelines and sort of watching my peers, I think that a lot of the suffering that we face has less to do with the seizures themselves than more just living in a world that's unwilling to include you. And I think that part really doesn't require medicine. That part is something that all of us can tackle. That part is about appealing to, our best humanity, which most people want to do. Most people want to act on their best humanity. Most people don't want to be thinking from their fight or flight all of the time. But we're not there. People aren't comfortable with us because they don't know about us. They don't know our stories. They don't know, even what epilepsy is at a basic level, because all that they've ever seen is hospital shows and horror movies. And of course they're afraid, So I think that the stigma is very real, and I think that it's more at fault for, an astronomical homelessness, unemployment, suicide rate, depression than probably epilepsy itself.
Did you feel like you started noticing it outside of you, Miles, the stigma at first, or did you confront it yourself as you like navigated school or navigated, friends and family? Like, what was your first interaction point? Because Skylar, like you had said, you actually kind of got to view the diagnosis on the outside first, through your brother's experiences.
Yeah, I think that I had the benefit of, I was very naive. And furthermore, I didn't know it any other way. So I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I never had to experience the doctor looking me in the eyes and saying, "You're not going to drive anymore." It was just always a sort of like looming deadline of, your life is not going to be normal. Your life is not going to be like other kids. And it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. And it wasn't all in one fell swoop. So it got harder and harder and harder to hide the fact that my life was unfolding differently as I got older. When I was a little kid and I was on the playground playing tag with everyone else, kids can be evil, right? Kids can be the worst, but kids are also a lot more malleable. So I would say, like, again, coming from a naive place, I figured I'd just say, I have this thing and it's great. My brain does this crazy thing. And isn't that so cool? Right? And so I was received at first with a certain amount of confidence. But as I became a teenager, and certainly in my early 20s, it sort of becomes a brand that's like on your forehead that gets brighter and brighter red, that scarlet letter, and it's certainly, you can start to feel it. And as I look back, I realize now people did walk away. There were families who chose not to have their kids play with me anymore. And I didn't notice that at a really young age. I just figured, Johnny's not as close with me anymore. Like, well, no, his parents probably told him, enough's enough. You don't talk to Miles anymore. So I think it was kind of like a silent killer before I was very aware.
I think that that's so true about children in general, and having that experience, and you don't know the norm. And in a lot of ways, like, I'm so glad you were protected from that as a kid, and not being able to see that and fully understand like those things until you were older. But I'm sure as life has gone on, there's a lot to kind of unpack with that. Skylar, when you said you received your diagnosis as a teenager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd seen it with your brother. What did that kind of, I know you mentioned a little bit feeling like you couldn't disclose it to people. How has that evolved over time? How do you feel like that was also tied to like being a teen and being nervous about this crazy thing happening to you that you never had, like all of those things?
And also, I'm curious, Skylar, as you told people, at a different junction in your life, were they like warmer or colder than you expected them to be?
Yeah. Oh, two great questions. Miles, like you said, like, I feel like when you're a teenager, it's almost like a scarlet letter. And so I was 15. I was a freshman in high school, and I just transferred high schools. I didn't know anyone. It was like the worst possible time in my life to probably get that diagnosis. And I also didn't know that I was having seizures because mine were a completely different kind than my brother's. So I went like 6 months without being diagnosed and just hiding them from everyone. So I think that also led me to hiding my epilepsy a lot because I was just so used to hiding. But yeah, it was like, I think unlike Miles, I was able to make that decision to hide it because I was 15. I wasn't a kid. I couldn't, I was able to do that. Only my parents knew. I remember being diagnosed, and my mom and dad were in the room at the hospital, and I was like, do not tell my brothers. I have 2 brothers. Do not tell my aunt. Don't tell anyone because this is just our secret. And I went, my whole entire life for the most part until 2020, like COVID is kind of what made me start talking about it. And it was just that moment of, I think honestly it was because of COVID. It's like that moment where you realize that nothing really matters and that it's like, why am I hiding this? Like, why does it matter? I had hid it because I wanted to, get into college. I wanted to have these opportunities that I didn't see my brother being given. And so that led me to being so closeted about my epilepsy. But it was so strange. I remember telling my brothers for the first time, and my older brother, he was so scared for me because every single time he had a seizure, he thought that he was going to die. I remember him disclosing, because he would always run across the sidewalk, like, or he would always run across the, what is it called? I'm like blanking on the,
The crosswalk.
the crosswalk. Yeah, no, my older brother, he told me that he would always run across the crosswalk, because he was afraid that he'd have a seizure and a car would run over him. And I never knew that. And so opening up to him, he was able to open up to me a lot more, about his experience. And every single day he is now worried about me. He also just told me in June, it's like been a few years since he's known, but he's also developmentally disabled. So he processes things differently. And he thought that when he got his brain surgery when he was 18, which was around the same time that I was diagnosed, that his epilepsy got transferred to me and that it's his fault this entire time. So that it's been a lot. It's been a multi-year process of kind of unpacking all of this. And then with my younger brother, who has dealt with a lot of mental health issues, for him, it was kind of that moment where he could actually connect with me, because he always saw me as the older sister who was like highly achieving and try, in that regard. But seeing that I had something, he was able to finally have that connection with me. So in a lot of ways, it's just deepened my relationships with my family. My friends were all shocked. They had no idea. Some of them were like, oh, we saw you sneaking pills and I looked at your pill model. And like a few of them knew, but they just didn't want to tell me that they knew.
Yeah.
So yeah, like little things like that. But it's funny because some people don't even know still, but I don't even know who knows and who doesn't know. So it's always a surprise whenever I catch up with someone.
I mean, that's first of all a very vulnerable story to share. So thank you. But I think what strikes me about what you said and finding community was your brother that had epilepsy and the one who didn't, and sort of how that bonded you, and how I think it's so hard to talk about this, but then when you're able to, the way that that can kind of be such a significant support. I think that's so much of what we're trying to do with the foundation, and so much of what we're trying to do with this podcast and our support groups and stuff is, if we can get past the fear and the hurdle of the stigma, which is completely valid, kind of the power in being able to help each other navigate through that. And obviously your community's literally within your own family, your epilepsy community, and that's very beautiful. But particularly as filmmakers, like, I'd love to talk to you guys a little bit about what you think we can all do and you can do to decrease the stigma and increase representation. And how does your work kind of play a role in that?
And I'm also curious to know, when you first saw epilepsy and seizures being represented in film and television, because Miles, you had said earlier, you made a brief comment about seizures being this very scary thing and almost kind of being this climactic moment in horror films. And as someone who doesn't deal with the diagnosis and didn't kind of encounter epilepsy until meeting Cameron, completely that tracks with me. I feel like every time I had encountered it in media, it was this very ambiguous, scary thing that was supposed to like jolt me and make me feel like I was in the unknown. But at the same time, I could leave the theater and not think about it again. And I'm curious for you two, like, what was there a moment in which you went, oh wow, that's how the world views me through media? And how has that, like Soph said, impacted your work?
That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. I don't think I've ever been asked that question of that's how the world sees me. From time to time, there will be some kind of thing that comes out where there's a film, I think it's called the After Party, right? Have we talked about this? I think it's called The After Party on Netflix, where kid has a seizure. He's like a rapper. He has a seizure, and then they start calling him Seizure Boy, and then that becomes his like title. And it was really criticized, and the epilepsy community went after it and was very hurt by like making comedy out of this. My position's a little different. I think that anytime there is, I'm not saying all representation is good representation by any means, but I think that these moments are important because it means that we can have a conversation about it, and then people can hear how we prefer to be represented, and then they can follow suit, right? There's always an opportunity under every problem, right? But I think I watched that and I went like, oh, Yeah, and from time to time I'll see a seizure in a movie, or someone will make like a seizure joke or something, or I'll just hear it. I'll just hear it and go like, "Oh, I see. This is the baseline. This is normal." And it provides an opportunity. And that may not be film for everyone. Like, I guess Skylar and I really are attached to, this one means of sharing a voice. It's a particularly complicated way of trying to reframe things in the world, but the real treasure of making Under the Lights is seeing how many people feel comfortable sharing their story in whatever medium that they want to, whether it be like a poem, you see like someone do like a rap now and then, or like a school project. When a story is told in a positive light and people get the sense of like, that's how I want to be portrayed, they will and do have a reaction where they say, I'm ready to tell my story. I want to talk about how they'll have a Skylar moment, right? I feel like I don't, this doesn't have to be in the basement of my heart anymore. I can talk about this. And then the person next to them feels like it's a normal thing. So then they do it. And the person next to them feels like it's a normal thing and they do it. But when your initial reaction is, oh, the normal reaction to epilepsy is to laugh about it or to laugh at that person, we're going to be in the dark a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I also have never been asked this question of like, what was that one moment? It's a great question. I have two answers. So one, I remember a neurologist or epileptologist once telling me that epilepsy is like the monster in a horror film, actually. And so it's so fascinating because it's like you're the werewolf, you are the vampire walking around like a normal person 1 second, and then you're a monster the next. And then people see that and they get scared because you're unpredictable. Like I feel like with other disability is what they were trying to explain is that
that's so harsh to tell.
Yeah.
Describe it that way because it equates being like something that's challenging or surprising with bad. And
I would have gone with a Hannah Montana analogy or something,
That would have been better.
Right. But I understand, but that's exactly your point. Like that was that person's reference and it became, yeah.
Yeah. And for so long, that's honestly what I related to the most. I think when I watched movies was like the witch, the vampire, like whatever was kind of like that monster and whatever I was watching, I could feel some kind of connection, whether that was holding on to a secret or being that monster or both. Because, a seizure is so unexpected, you never know when it's going to happen. Just like, I guess, when a werewolf turns into a werewolf. At least they have the moon though. So, but yeah, I think in general, for me, watching TV, I think it was mostly just the jokes. I don't think there was one specific seizure in a movie, like some reenactment of it. But it was always like the seizure boy, joking about seizing, joking about, lobotomies, different things like that just like kind of make that impact on you. And a lot of movies and TV do that. And I don't think it's recognized as much, but it's the little things that just add up, like, oh, it's an episode of this, it's an episode of that. And across all platforms. And I think all of that adds up. And the Netflix After Party was not great. That was a more recent one. And it's really disappointing that film and TV are still writing characters like that, because you'd think we'd get to a point at this age in society that we wouldn't have jokes like that. But yeah, I think, as a filmmaker, I think that's probably why Miles and I are doing that, is to rewrite that narrative and to, help educate people.
It's an interesting point that Miles brings up. I think the fact that we are still having those depictions is indicative of the fact that there hasn't even been enough negative depictions to reframe the narrative and to educate people. Like the opportunities to even educate people are like so minimal. And I think it also goes to the fact that the epilepsy community being somewhat so individual and hidden in a lot of ways, to have a kind of community voice to speak out about those things is hard. And so having people like you guys who are willing to sort of step up and I don't want to say like be a voice for the entire community, but to at least be a voice in the community to say, no, this is like, we can have good representation. We can have, we can start to reframe those narratives is really important. So that makes a lot of sense.
So I guess this kind of leads us to the most daunting question that you do have to have an answer to, which is how do we decrease stigma and increase representation? And do we think increasing representation is going to help decrease stigma? Like, do they go hand in hand with each other? And yes, the entire community is waiting on your guys' answer right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of this is terribly complicated. And that's what's kind of unfortunate about it, is that it's taken, a very, very long time to just get to a place where we're even talking about it at all, in any meaningful capacity. But we are not reinventing the wheel here, folks. Like, all we really have to do is pick another community that is having the benefit of mainstream media conversation and just do what they do. We're not the first. This isn't the first time this has ever happened. If it's very simple. If you have a story, tell it. If you have the luxury of feeling safe telling your story, you must tell it. You have an obligation to tell it. Because when you do, the person who doesn't feel comfortable telling their story yet, for whom that would be a very transformative and healing experience, will tell it. It will make it okay for them to tell it. And then once people look around and everybody's sharing their stories, it's no longer weird or scary or threatening to do so. And when that takes place, when it's a very normal thing for people to be discussing their epilepsy, because guess what? Epilepsy is very normal, statistically speaking, then it starts to become weird to make fun of it. It starts to become weird to criticize it or victimize people who have epilepsy. People don't really make Alzheimer's jokes. Like, it's not really a thing. Doesn't really happen. People might make like memory jokes, like Finding Nemo is all about memory jokes, but people don't really make condescending or cruel jokes about grandma's Alzheimer's. And why is that? It's because just about every character over the age of 72 in a movie presents memory issues. We're very used to it, and it's presented in a very empathetic light. So if that becomes the standard, and to do that we all have to be talking about it, then I think this pretty much dissolves. And I don't think this is I hope in my lifetime kind of conversation. I think that this is a next 5 years, under 10 years thing if everybody takes it as their personal homework, to do so.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I look back and it took me how many years to come out and talk about it. And honestly, a lot of that was my mom and my dad constantly reminding me to tell my brothers and being like, can you just tell them? And then also the reality that I got a film deal because of that. And it was at that time, and they literally asked me to direct a film about epilepsy. And in my world at that time, I never thought in a million years I'd be making a film about epilepsy, because that was not something that was a part of, my brand as a filmmaker. It wasn't a part of who, I was representing myself as. And I was also just so scared. And I think going back to that original question, though, is like, I think we're having to fight years and years and years and years of stigma by opening up and one by one coming out about our story. We're talking like way back in the day when people were like, oh, you're either the closest to God or the closest to the devil. So I think it's so many centuries of this stigma that's been embedded within people for as long as humans have possibly had epilepsy. And it's like, we're at this time, I think, in history where we have film, we have TV, we have media, we have social media, and we're able to share stories in a way that is more rapid, more accessible to everyone around the world. And that's something that's really special and so powerful. You can have a TikTok. You don't have to be a filmmaker. And I think that that's so special, is forming these communities within, these social medias or these communities of, online presence or film or whatnot. So yeah, I think that we're at that precipice of a lot of people opening up, like myself. And I think, people like Miles and other people who have been more public about their epilepsy have inspired me to come out about my own. And so hopefully, I hope that me doing so will also help others, and it'll be that trickle effect that Miles mentioned.
And I also think with representation, it impacts the resources that we have for our community because it's so under discussed in like the general zeitgeist. There's just a lack of research dollars, and there's just a lack of resources for anyone to access. People are a little bit confused, and I just feel like the more that we talk about it, and so if we have this conversation like every few months with people we might meet that are like, oh, I have a sibling with epilepsy, or someone I know that just got diagnosed, and my knee-jerk reaction sometimes is just to be like, hey, we have a website, you should check it out, it might be a good starting spot. And selfishly, I wish, like, as proud of as I am of the work that we're doing, I wish I had like something that was even more accessible, something something more grand that like I don't even need to deliver to someone, they can just instinctually go there for a resource.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about the stigma and everything representing like in so many years and centuries past. And I think, as we know, like systems of these things, they take a long time to unlearn. And it's just a reminder of people are so afraid of what they do not understand and they do not know. And for those reasons, like not only does that mean there's less money going towards it because people just literally don't get it and they don't know, um, but it's also just so much harder for people to come talk about when they have to be the source of education on it all the time. I always think like we burden people with epilepsy to become the resource on their illness and to educate everybody around them. And I can only imagine how hard that is. And like Miles said, when you are in a place that you can do that, it's amazing to do so. But I hope that through increasing representation, we can sort of increase research dollars and also just make lives easier for the people who have epilepsy so that they don't just constantly have to explain it to everybody that they're not being possessed by the devil. Um, I don't think as many people think that today, but I'm sure there's still a lot of people that do. So yeah, we're very excited to have, especially with Cameron, artists that are, excited to be talking about this and using their personal experience. So we always come back to you guys in sort of a source of hope. I think art can create so much hope. And yeah, but I like Skylar's point to the people at home that I think social media is a really good tool for building community these days and for getting word out in ways that there's kind of incomparable.
When it comes to speaking of misunderstanding and understanding, my last question for you two is, what's something you wish people better understood about your diagnosis?
I know it's a lot. we
Like
love to
trying to
ask it because people are always like, ooh, one thing.
yeah, one thing, right?
You can, if you like this story, you're more than welcome.
You definitely can.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
the biggest thing, and this is not unique to epilepsy, it's really not even unique to disability, is that we don't necessarily need people to know. We need people to be open to listening. If you're willing to ask what a person needs and let them answer the question, you're off to a way better start than assuming you've done all the research and you know all about it. And you're just, how many people, and Skylar, I don't know, maybe you've run into this, but I definitely feel that I have faced innumerable medical professionals who just somehow know more than me about the subject, and I should shut up and listen to them, and it's despite, I don't know, you could call it expertise of living in my own body for 29 years, right? But it's simply asking someone what they need goes a very long way, because everyone is different. And if we can hold it to a standard that's not unique to disability, that's just treating people with respect, right? Then disability is no longer really that scary. And the challenge with disability, I think, is that we treat it differently than other life problems. If someone goes through a divorce or they have a car accident or something like that, you go, that sounds really hard. Let me know if I can do anything, please. Like if I can do anything as your friend, please. But as soon as it becomes a medical issue, people go, oh, wow. And there's an assumption of, I can't deal with this. Just ask someone what they need. What do you need, Sophie?
Right.
What do you need?
No, that's very powerful. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that liability aspect, I think people just automatically assume we're a liability because we have seizures. And it's not necessarily the case. Like, we know what we need, and the same thing. It's like, do we need do we want an ambulance call? Do we, what is our protocol? If that could be normalized. It's just like an allergy. It's just ask us and we can tell you. I think. Sorry, my brain is all over the place. I'm there's so many things to say. But also going back to the medical professional as well. When I was diagnosed with an epilepsy. As a genetic disorder that I would die in my late 20s or early 30s. And I was 15, and of course that's the worst thing that you also could hear. And I still, I've seen so many neurologists. I didn't even know what an epileptologist was until 6 months ago. I'm still on this journey of figuring out what's wrong with my brain. I don't think I have that anymore, but it's every single neurologist, epileptologist has a different answer. And I think that there's a lot of gaslighting a lot of the time where it's oh, you're fine. You'll live, you're fine. And it's but I don't want to have seizures my whole life. So how can we fix that? So I agree. I think that there just needs to be, I don't know, a lot of work done in that world. That totally doesn't answer the question though, but.
It sounds to me like you want people to listen to you as well, and to feel like you're, doctors too, your medical needs are validated. And I think it kind of reminds me somewhat too of the person who's oh, have you tried this diet? When you're I'm dealing with all these health issues, and it's okay, you read one article.
Right.
But not to put words in your mouth, but kind of both of what you guys are saying reminds me a little bit of that, of just having compassion for understanding that this is something you are going through, and offering support rather than dismissiveness and know-it-allness, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. And I think on another level as well, as a woman, there's that level of also, having kids and having relationships and being the woman in a relationship as well. And I remember, again, when I was 15, laying in the hospital bed, being diagnosed, I turned to my mom and I was I'm never having kids because I don't want my kids to have this. I already grew up with a brother my whole life with it, and I don't want to be a parent to a kid with epilepsy. But now, that I'm at the age of 30, I'm rethinking that. But that makes me so nervous telling a potential partner or whatnot that I have epilepsy and my brother has epilepsy. This could be genetic. We don't know. That's also another thing, is every neurologist says something different about it being genetic. And I think it's people understanding and being okay with that, and being okay and with the potential of, having a kid with epilepsy. And I think I've learned to, I'm welcome to that idea and that potential. Does not sound right, but it's been years of working on accepting that. And I think that, being a woman with epilepsy adds another level of complication on that end.
Yeah, I think the kid thing is something that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, and I think we actually are doing an episode on fertility, just by the way, at some point in this series. I don't know if it comes before or after this, but I think that is like you said, it's about acceptance and education and understanding what that would mean too. And I also think there's a certain responsibility to anybody having kids to we want to be able to go into those kinds of things with openness and open-mindedness and understanding the level of care. And I can only imagine how hard that's been with you to have those conversations with people. But I think it's I don't want to say brave, but I feel like brave is such an overused word in the disability world. But in some aspects, like I think it is to be able to be open and vulnerable with those kinds of conversations. So
We know that sharing your story with us feels a part of your duty in your journey, but thank you for trusting it with us and these listeners. And thank you both so much for being here.
yeah, hopefully we're decreasing stigma as we speak today.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you enjoy this episode, you can join the conversation at the Cameron Boyce Foundation. Those are the tags for Instagram and Facebook. And if you want to check out some resources or have questions, want to learn more, you can go to thecameronboycefoundation.org. We'll catch you guys on the next episode.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.